I think fundamentally all people at heart are good people, and we are often confronted with people whose story has been misinterpreted and they've doubled down in defense, defending that's to the point of mutation. But people are good people, and I believe in the potential of people. That's what gives me hope.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbour Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
This is what people do on Sundays in Toronto. How excellent is that?
Is it Sunday?
Huh? It's Sunday.
Okay.
Anyone do the marathon before coming here? No one?
Good. I feel a moral obligation.
They might still be running.
Yeah, they must be. Like the marathon was going on. It took about an hour and a half to get in from the airport, and I was talking to the driver. I was like, "Why do people feel compelled to run the marathon? You know, they have public transport these days."
I will just tell you, since
Yeah.
you're not from Toronto, an hour and a half from the airport, generally how long it takes.
Oh,
So-
okay.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. We love to complain about our traffic here because
Yeah.
it's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad.
I can see.
So, who here is a fan of Oliver's?
Oh,
Probably should have asked who isn't a fan. Do you think they'd-
my kids aren't fans. They don't really care. I was saying to somebody I was with earlier there that my son went to the library, and we're living back in Northern Ireland these days, and he went to the local library with his school, and he came back that night, and he said, "Daddy, did you have something to do with a book about crayons?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes like, "I thought that looked like you." And I was like, "Have I never read that to you?" And he goes, "No."
What do you read to your kids?
Other people's books?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, we'll
Yeah.
talk about what you're reading to them in a bit. We were talking earlier, just when we started, for those of you who are looking at the crowd and thinking, ooh, how long is that line going to be to get Oliver to sign it? Do you want to tell them about Mexico?
Some signing lines do tend to get longer, and my reasoning for that is that there's more books that I make. But a couple of years ago, I had to do a signing in Mexico City that lasted for 9 hours. I did have to take a pee break halfway through.
So we'll keep it tighter than that.
Yeah.
You're not going to stay for 9 hours because you're on this tour, and you were in
Yes.
Chicago last night.
I was in Chicago, an event with the Chicago Humanities Festival yesterday afternoon. Somewhere else before that. But it's
Onwards to London.
onwards to London tomorrow,
Yeah.
and then a whole bunch of UK cities.
And you were saying to me that you don't normally or usually tour that much with your books.
I
but this one's
don't
different.
know. The last book tour that I did actually was for Here We Are, and then before that it was for I think not every book gets a tour, and it's not like I don't enjoy it, but I have one foot in the publishing world, one foot in the fine art world, one foot in social and climate responsibility world.
Just pause. You have 3 feet so far?
Yep.
Yep.
But I'm moving them around. And my older brother helps me, so we'll throw his feet into the mix. But it's the time becomes an issue. But also, it's getting out and promoting a book. It's always felt like a little showy offy, or like look at me, or buy this book. I don't feel it's not a natural fit for me. But with this book, it's very different, and I feel a sense of urgency about getting some of the concepts and ideas out into the world, and so it doesn't feel like I'm trying to sell anything. It's more, it's like there's some really important things that need to be discussed globally. Let's start having those conversations.
So let's start there then.
Okay.
I was going to do some rapid fire with you, but we'll do it in a bit. I have to say, so I have 3 kids, 2 are 10, one's 13. They all feel that they're too old for Oliver Jeffers' kids' books. They are wrong. I insist on reading to my 10-year-olds still, even though they are perfectly capable of reading themselves.
Well,
And
it's
I
nice
often
to be
pull out-
read too.
But so I like reading your books. I'm not just saying this because I'm sitting across from you. So this past week, given world events, which has been hard for so many people, obviously over there, really, really hard, but for many people in our city and communities as well. So I pulled out Lost and Found and read that, and I have to say it was such a nice sell for me, and I love imagining that penguin in that upside down umbrella at the end.
Yeah.
And I always imagine him hacking a dart or something, doing something quite adult-like, eating popcorn.
Have you seen
or
my
whatever.
sketchbook?
So we just want to thank you for bringing that beauty and stuff to all of us who read your books, and
Thank you.
for that. And so we're going to talk about big issues today. What have you been thinking about, big picture, in the past week or so?
Well, I mean, in the past week, there's obviously been a lot of there's been a flare-up of violence in the Middle East, and you can't help but be horrified by that, by the willingness of people to commit absolute atrocities. And being Northern Irish, there was often comparisons when, back in the 80s and 90s, that it's like we were compared to other conflicts worldwide, and in some ways there is a similarity where it's a cycle of revenge violence and what that accomplishes. But in other ways, there was less similarities because I suppose there's a game of political chess going on in the Middle East that doesn't really affect Northern Ireland, which sort of complicates things. But I think it's a very delicate issue to speak about, and even in attempting to say anything, you end up horrifying people by not taking their side, which I think is a dangerous place to be. But the Irish have always been have been compared to the Palestinians because of British occupation in Northern Ireland, for one thing, and so there always was I suppose this a familiarity or a kindred spirit in some ways of like, we see your pain, you see our pain. But most of my friends in New York are Jewish, and I recognize the very real pain that this rise in anti-Semitism is causing human beings all around the world. And I think we're into fairly scary, dangerous territory that by critiquing the movements of a state government is akin to being seen as anti-Jewish, which it's not, but also by that same measure, being seen to have sympathy for innocent people on all sides, and the flip side case with the Palestinians is not to say that you approve of Hamas. I think there's absolutely horrific atrocities going on, and what my thoughts have been is that, is there a way forward for compassion here? Is there a way forward for the humanity of the very normal people who just want to live out their lives to shine through? And in Northern Ireland, it took the bravery of people who were willing to negotiate and hold empathy and compassion to begin negotiations for a way in which that the cycle could stop.
Thank you for that. Don't worry, kids. We're going to be talking about crayons, too.
Yeah.
Don't worry. It's a non sequitur, but it might have some resonance to what you just said. I just want to start by sort of setting the table by reading a passage for your book, which I've jotted down here, which is, the difference between right and better is that being right is about proving the past, while being better is about building the future.
Right.
Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. And this is, so whenever we moved back to Northern Ireland, and that happened by accident, by the way, because we, in our infinite wisdom, thought we're going to take a year off travel with our kids before they go to school, and we're going to, go around the world. And we started that in the summer of 2019. And so we rented our apartment out in Brooklyn for 2 years, and then set sail and got as far as Japan in February of 2020. And the shutters of the world came pulled down, and we went to the only place that we could think to go, which was a little apartment that we had in Northern Ireland. And we've kind of been there ever since. So, but in being in Northern Ireland, and as somebody who would have considered myself a bleeding heart liberal artist in New York, what really kind of shocked me when I got back to Northern Ireland was I could see from the other side of the ocean, back in New York, there was a very bitter election cycle that was happening. And it was like, the rhetoric here reminds me of where Northern Ireland was in the 1970s. And why is that? Why are people going against their own best interests by trying to prove that their story is more important than somebody else's story, or that they were right? And it was like, it's holding people back, because by you being right, it means that somebody else must be wrong. And then that person who is wrong or wronged then carries that with them. Whereas if you replace the terms right and wrong with better and worse, it suddenly becomes very clear what needs to be done in any given scenario and what it is that you actually want. So in the case of Northern Ireland, better and worse would be stopping voting in sectarian parties that keep us apart.
So as you were thinking about that, so in 2020, how did that lead to this? In other words, what's the genesis for
Okay.
Begin Again?
It was partly that awareness, that realization, but there was an anecdote where we'd just come back. We'd been in Japan, so we knew how serious COVID was going to be, and in being quite aware that all around everybody thought that the world is falling apart. It's all everything's going pear-shaped. It's all broken, and I do think that we have a very short attention span these days, and in thinking about germs, it was like, we forget how far we've actually come in many regards. Like the first person who suggested invisible things that float through the air make us sick was locked in a mental asylum only a century and a half ago. So we were there, we knew how serious lockdown was gonna be. Other people weren't really buying it. Crossing the road one day, just in the days before it, we met an old lady, and she had 2 big bags of shopping, and she was very elderly. And I said, "Oh, you're getting ready for lockdown?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Do you think we're going to be in this for a long time?" And she goes, "You know what, love, I do." Because for a minute, I thought this was going to remind me of back in the war, because Belfast was heavily bombed in World War II. It was making all the ships and the planes for the British Army. And she goes, "But it's not, because back then we all tried to see how can we help, whereas look around today, everybody's just trying to see what can I get away with." And it was the realization of that moment, and that everybody is communicating from a perspective of preemptive defense, that there's no conversation here. We're all screaming into the wind and all so busy trying to be understood that we forget to try and understand.
And so at that juncture, you had these thoughts going through your head. Now, you're an author and illustrator. Is that what we're calling illustrator? Yes? You don't love that word.
But illustrator, artist, storyteller. Do you know, just a little aside, I had a sculpture at COP26, which is the UN summit, and in Glasgow was 26 and was heavy on climate. And I had this sculpture in the Blue Zone, which is where all the world leaders and the business leaders go. And they didn't have a box to check for artists when I was registering. So the young Senegalese woman who spoke 12 languages, by the way, who registered me, she says, no box for artists, so I just put you down as an observer and a translator. I was like, that's kind of perfect.
Yeah.
So I call myself an observer and a translator these days. I don't, yes, I draw pictures. There's an accessibility about the pictures. But, I know people who are better at drawing pictures than me. Owen Colfer is this author, and we did a book together, and his son once asked me, "Oliver, why are your drawings so popular?" And it took me a minute to realize that was not a compliment.
Okay, well, let's talk to you as observer and translator, or artist and author, however you want to put it. So you helped the lady with the bags across the street?
Yep.
Okay.
Then went
And then
home
you had
and
to
thought
make a
about that.
decision. What am I going to do with this, right?
Exactly. And at the start, I didn't know. There was there's something here. I have to start putting pencil to paper. Any project that I do, whether it ends up being a talk, or whether it ends up being a film, or whether it ends up being a sculpture or a book or a painting, always starts with a pencil and a piece of paper. And so I just felt this sudden sense of urgency to start making a pattern out of these patterns that I was recognizing. And I think the first thing that I drew was deeply thinking about what is it that people want. And because when you ask somebody what they want, they tend to answer what they don't want. So what is it people actually want? And I think one of the first things I drew was the 2 hands going, because coming out of COVID, that experience, if you'd asked me what I would have missed before COVID happened, if I was told, you cannot leave this tiny apartment for however many months it was, what will you think you'd miss? I probably would have listed, fancy art parties, or restaurants, or going, all of these sort of superfluous things. But a year into it, I was like, I miss having lunch with my dad. And it was just a reprioritization of the things that were genuinely important. And it was we need each other. That's what we need. And so whenever you say, what do you want? And they say money or fame, but what for? That's leverage. Ultimately, we all just want to be loved, just a little bit.
All right, and then you had to make a decision. You could have written another kid's book with similar themes, I think, not this exact book.
Yeah.
So for you, when did you say no? And you don't call this an adult book, you call it an all-ages book.
An all-ages, it's a picture book. I've never said I write children's books. I've always said I write picture books. Because I do, the Fate of Fausto is equally a valid a narrative for adults as it is for kids, about greed and arrogance. And I knew this was going to be a book, and honestly, one of the reasons that I thought this is not going to be a kid's book, because there's some fairly heavy themes in here about society. And then I tried reading to my kids. They could not have cared less. But I'm now realizing that that's maybe a comment on just their idea of me as a father rather than that it's not for kids. So, because, there's plenty of kids who have been getting it and understanding it and having conversations, and plenty of parents realizing this is actually a nice platform to begin having some of these conversations.
Yeah. I
'Cause,
want to just... Sorry, go ahead.
Because who was I talking about this? But the idea of raising children, it was like, you don't really raise children, you raise future adults. And these things have to be introduced at some point if we're going to be contributing positively to society as future adults.
So when I open this book, I'll show you in a second, hopefully we can see at the back. If someone, came up to me at a dinner party or something
Yeah.
and asked me this question, I would be like, where is someone else to talk to? Because this is a big question
Yeah.
to start with. So it says, where did we begin? I don't know how well everyone can see this. You'll see it in your own copy of your book. But I'm curious about that what seems like a very sort of almost benign and simple question, yet very complex
Yeah.
and deep.
Yeah.
These 4 words were deliberate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that we are storytelling creatures, and stories are probably one of the most important things that humans have created. And I say that all individuals are a collection of stories. They're the stories that we're told, which is our history, our context, what our ancestors experienced, where we're from. There's the stories that are told about us, that's our reputation. And then there's the stories that we tell, the stories we tell to other people, kind of a projection of our personality. But the most important story of all in there is the story that we tell ourselves. What is it that fuels us forward into an unknown future? And we have governed ourselves by stories all these years. Like the first stories that try to make sense out of chaos were constellations, looking up at these, the nails hanging the black curtain up at night, and what are they? What do they mean? And then the lines between them were the first illustrations of those stories. We are a story-driven species, and so what are the stories that we've been told? Why does everybody feel so lost right now? Where have we come from? What have the stories we've been telling ourselves as a context for what's happened that it feels so disjointed and turbulent? So it seemed like a reasonable place to begin at the beginning.
So you were talking about the constellations there. Is that why the art's the sky, there's Earth, and there's other planets, some stars, and was that
that's very, very deliberate. There's anybody who's been following my work for a while. But you know what? Even How to Catch a Star is interested in the night sky. Way back home, you've got this small boy who flew a plane up, and he's on the moon looking back at Earth. I've become very, very fascinated with the overview effect, which is a phenomenon that happens to the human mind when it ventures far enough away from the surface of our planet to understand that this is a ball floating in space. And whenever I was recognizing the language that these astronauts were using, talking about looking at Earth from as far as the moon, that was the same way that I was talking about Northern Ireland from the distance of New York, because in New York, a lot of people didn't really know or care about our conflict. Like a lot of people didn't know the difference between Great Britain, the United Kingdom, and the British Isles. Does anybody want to have a go, by the way, at doing those? So the 2 of them are geographical terms. So the big island is Great Britain with England, Scotland, Wales. The United Kingdom is a political term because it's the big island and half, or a quarter rather, of the small island. So that's the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And then both islands are the British Isles. Although I found out that people in the Republic of Ireland, they were like, we don't call it the British Isles. And I was like, well, what do you call it then? And they say, these islands. I was like, well, what if you're somewhere else? Those islands. So, speaking about Northern Ireland from that distance, and it just seemed like a tragic, poignant waste of time and energy that we're killing each other to be either British or Irish, and nobody cares. And it was similar to the way that astronauts spoke about looking at Earth from the moon. And then a lot of perspective and cosmological perspective started to present itself in my work, and using that as a device, I suppose, you could really talk about just how important stories are, for example. So whenever the Apollo 8 mission went up and went around the moon to look for a landing spot for Apollo 11, it didn't occur to them to look back. Their focus was on the moon and going out that way. And it's only when they came around and then they could see Earth, and they're like, wow, look at that, that's beautiful. They took a photograph which became known as the Earthrise photograph, which started the Green Movement in 1969. But they could not work out what part of the Earth they were looking at. They could see a giant landmass, but it took them longer than they care to admit to recognize what that was. And what they were looking at was the entire bottom half of Africa. They didn't recognize it because it was sideways. And we are not used to looking at the map sideways.
Yeah.
And then it becomes very clear. It's like, oh yeah, we're a ball floating in space. There is no up, there is no down. It's completely arbitrary that north is at the top of a map. That's a concept, that's a construct, that's a story we told ourselves to make sense.
Yeah, I always say we think we're the center of the universe when we look at maps because we're always the center of it where you live. So when I lived in the Middle East,
Yeah.
well, North America was far left of that. When I look
Yeah.
at a map here, it's
Yeah,
it's a dead
and
center.
I found it really interesting when I moved to the States and I found some old school maps that divided Russia right down the middle so the USA could be in the middle. And, you know, European maps for centuries have made Greenland about 9 times bigger than it really is to push Europe down more in towards the middle. Like, they're highly misleading. There's only one accurate map, actually, that's on a piece of paper, and it's called the Peters projection. And you look at it and you're like, ooh, wow. And Africa is way bigger than it's often denoted in maps.
Were you a kid that was fascinated by space?
Yes,
Yeah.
fascinated by space, also fascinated by maps and an understanding of where we are. So I was born with an intuitively good sense of direction, so which has played me well, and it makes up because I'm also terrible at looking for things. So I know where I am, but I don't know where anything else is. And actually, the joke of me being terrible at looking for things was part of the story process that came into There's a Ghost in This House, where this young girl who's trying to find something that she's never going to find. That's kind of me. So
Autobiographical in
yeah.
a sense. So you decide, okay, I'm going to write this all ages book. I have this concept, I have this
Yeah.
idea. And then you've got to kind of figure out what your approach is because you
Yeah,
have
it
not
could
done
have.
this.
I might have made this into a film. I might have made it as
Yeah.
a series of paintings. I didn't know. The reason why I ended up with a book, I think, is because a book is accessible in a way that other mediums just aren't. And even if it was an art exhibition, say it was a collection of paintings, that would be together for a short period of time and then never again. Whereas the book stands the test of time. It sticks around. It doesn't need a plug. It can be handed down. It permeates and it stays in culture in a different way. So if I want to get some of these topics of conversation out there, I figured a book is about the best way to do that.
And so as you start writing, what is your process? Do you do art and writing at the same time, or how do you do it?
I often do both the words and pictures at the same time. A kid asked me that once. It was like, do you write or draw first? And I was like, I do them both at the same time. And they went like this. Wow. I was like, not quite like that. But it's a feeling thing. Whenever you remember something, do you remember that in words or do you remember that in pictures? It's neither. It's sort of a feeling. And then you've got everything I try to do, I try to convey what I'm saying and feeling in a way that has as little distortion as possible. So it's a combination of how do I say this and show this? And I've always felt that showing is more powerful than saying. But with the combination of both things, you're setting out the ingredients so that whoever is reading it or viewing it can put those together in their own mind. And that's a much more powerful emotional response when anybody out there then becomes a co-creator of this, because I'm not spelling something out, but it's when it comes together in their mind, that's the completion of it.
And so when you're writing for young kids, I would imagine, or non-adults, I will say, it might be easier to picture your reader. In other words, I don't know if you write for one person. If that's
I
sort
do
of your
write for one
approach, yeah?
person.
When you're writing for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
there isn't as much of a singularity.
No.
So when you were thinking like of the words, because this book, it's really beautiful and complex, and yet its beauty lies in simplicity as well.
I think there's two books really that are like this. Here We Are and this are similar, is in that they're not stories. All the other books are stories, and stories have a classic arc, which is a beginning and a middle and an end. And sometimes when I'm making a book, I don't know how to end it sometimes, and then it'll sit on the shelf. Like Stuck was one of those examples where I made Stuck. Has anybody read Stuck? Okay, true story. That really happened. Okay, and then I started to exaggerate it about halfway through. But so I really did get a kite stuck in a tree, so on, and I was like, there's something here. But for the longest time, I thought, obviously the resolution is that everything comes down again, and I don't know how that to happen in a way that felt satisfying. Couldn't figure it out, so set it to the side. Then I went to my older brother's house to watch a movie with him, and his nephews were playing, and they built this really elaborate, like, kind of fort game thing, and they were so invested in it, and all of a sudden then next door kicked the ball over the fence by accident, and that was it. They were gone. They just forgot all about that. And it was like, wow, yeah, maybe things don't have to just end. People just become interested in something else. And so that became the ending of Stuck. But the film that I was watching with my brother was the original Italian Job with Michael Caine. And I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it's like after the car chase, and they're on this bus with all the gold from the bank heist. All the gold, they're dangling off a bridge. The gold's at one end, the people are all at the other. And anytime they move, the gold slips. And Michael Caine's last lines in the book are, "Hang on a minute, lads, I've got a great idea." And that's the last line of the book Stuck. It's like, you don't have to just end things. There can be momentum going on.
I think everyone can tell this from you. You're as much an artist and a writer as you are sort of like a deep thinker, a public thinker.
Yeah. Well, I didn't actually answer the last question. So,
It happens all the time in my business. It's okay. We just
so all
move on.
those other stories are, beginning, middle, and end. Telling classic stories, mostly trying to entertain myself, both as an adult, but the memory I have of myself as a child. And Here We Are was not that. It was a set of observations, just about the beautiful simplicity of life on Earth in what felt like a very angry place to suddenly be raising a child. And the same with this. It's a set of observations. With the stories, I tend to just not really show them to people, and I intuitively know. But with the intention of this book was to convey complicated feelings in a simple way, I keep testing them on people, and I keep reading and showing, and if there's something that is not landing the way that I feel it needs to land, then I go back and finesse it, because I want to boil things down to such simplicity that they cannot be disagreed with, because I have an intuitive feeling that all people, even on various different political divides and religious divides, are much more similar than we actually give ourselves credit for. And so how do I get to that deep emotional point before there's misinterpretation?
You could have written a novel. You could have written nonfiction. This is nonfiction. This is
Yeah.
deep philosophical
But writing's
stuff.
hard.
Writing's hard.
Drawing pictures
Is that why?
is way easier.
I wanted to probe that a little bit with you. Is that just like writing is hard? Agreed. But did you feel compelled to be Oliver Jeffers' artist in conjunction with Oliver Jeffers' writer?
No, it just doesn't occur to me to start anything as an essay or as the written word. I'm a visual artist first and foremost that uses words as a tool in the toolbox. So I use words very sparingly. It's a different way of writing. It's almost more poetry if you were to just see it without any of the images. So to write a novel, unless there was something that I felt would be done that would be a better execution than showing it and saying it at the same time. And that may well happen. I don't know. Because like even, talking about the Middle East earlier and trying to speak about that, it's the first time that I've been flummoxed for what an image would be. Because there's no way to convey this in images right now, because the pain and the suffering and the emotional trauma is so heavy that almost an image could trigger things in a way that is not intended. So it's the first time I've been stumped for what something will look like.
So this book, I've seen it described as a book about the climate crisis, about greed, about how would you describe what this book is about?
I think it's a book about the power of storytelling and the importance of community. And is it a book about climate? Sure, but so's Stuck. So's The Day the Crayons Quit. The thinking that climate is this separate issue that's over here is dangerous to us. Because everything is climate related. We need a climate for anything to happen in. And the idea that it's an isolated problem, even the way which countries go in to negotiate their own climate terms and the way they deal with things, it's like, remember there was non-smoking sections in airplanes? It's a bit like that, because germs and weather do not need passports. So to treat these things as if they did is laughably futile. And whenever, that overview effect again, it becomes very obvious that this is one giant single super system. It needs to be treated with a cohesive, united front for anything to take hold. Frank White is one of the NASA engineers that put some of those early spaceships up, and he said, we're going to have to start acting as one species with one destiny. We are not going to survive if we don't start doing that.
And so, what role do you see art playing in the climate crisis?
I think art is a massively important role, because it's right up until this point, it's been thought of as a science issue. Anybody here a teacher or in education? Okay, so very important work that is preparing future contributing members of society. There's been a lot of talk worldwide about STEM education. Science, technology, engineering, maths. And it's only recently that somebody thought to put an A in there for art. And I've been going to all of these science conferences and working with scientists, and I've managed to convince them all that the A is the most important letter in there, because science is how we do something, but art is why we do it. So it's the stories that drive us forward. The science figures out what to do with that. So that is the job of science, or of art. So art is not, it's not decoration. It's not making something look pretty. It's not entertainment. In a visual talk that I've been doing, I prepared this slide, and it's like, art and storytelling are not the icing on the cake. They're not even the cake. They are the table upon which the cake sits. The job of art and storytelling is to change the ground under your feet so you see the sky differently, and you see your role in the world differently.
And so when you're thinking about these big issues, this summer, just by way of example, and I don't have to tell any of you, the hottest summer on record since we've started keeping records, from Greece to Hawaii to Canada to New York, there were floods.
Ireland?
Yeah, to Ireland. Where do you find the hope? Because so many people, I would say previous to this summer, but so many people anecdotally had told me, like, I've never felt so hopeless.
Yep. Because we're all disconnected. Because we are in this age of liberalism and individualism, where we're all told that we are, the most important person in the world, and that's a lovely way to think, but it disconnects us from our community. So the massiveness of this problem compared to you as an individual seems overwhelming. So where is my hope there? Because having been at a bunch of these conferences, speaking at the TED Climate Countdown, running in the rooms at like UN Climate Week, for all of these problems that we face, there are solutions. We are just not getting behind the same ones. And that's ego comes into it. And even in the climate arena, people are prioritizing being right over being better. So a way to rephrase this or reframe it and shift the perspective on it is that we don't have a climate problem. The climate is not broken. The world is not broken. It's doing exactly what it should with the input it's receiving. We have a people problem in that we are too busy arguing over what to play on the radio to notice the smoke coming out of the engine. So it seems infinitely easier to settle an argument than to change the weather. And we can do that. There are solutions. We just have to start getting behind the same ones and explaining to people and bringing people in and along the journey that they have a part to play in this. So when I spoke at COP26 and I did that sculpture, people were saying there was 5 groups of people present. And I realized there wasn't, there was 6. So those groups were world leaders, business leaders, the delegates trying to actually make the change, the media. Then outside there was the angry youth protesting, which I probably would have been in had I not been inside the blue zone. But then from inside this, the inside passage, I was like, realized that that's not actually helping. These are the people trying to fix the problem, and yelling at them is discouraging rather than, if it was a halftime talk, it should have been encouraging rather than you're doing it wrong. And I have noticed from watching my wife, the way she mothers our children, that you'll never get anybody to change their mind by telling them that they're wrong. But yet that's what we keep doing. The last group of people present at COP26, so if all the people that cared about climate change were in that one city, the last group of people was represented by the taxi drivers. 80% of that city did not care. And when you talk to them, they're like, what do you think's happening in here? I don't know, it's a waste of money. Why? They have not been included in the story of what is happening and their role in it. So the future of storytelling in the climate arena needs to not be about these internal debates between the protests and the business leaders. It is a matter of bringing the 80% of people who don't feel that they've got an entry point in to bring them along.
How do we do that?
By including them, by rephrasing how it works. An example I was using is in 2016, the election in the USA, coal mining became like the poster child of the forgotten people of America. And, logically, as a liberal, it was like, well, coal's bad, it's destroying our planet. And from the other perspective, it was like, don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me I'm not important. If we had gone about that very differently, instead of saying, you're irrelevant, coal is bad, we had said, thank you, that mission is now complete. We need you for a new job. We have a new mission. And brought those people with us, it would have been an entirely different scenario.
We're going to take audience questions just in a couple of minutes. So just if you have a question, there's going to be microphones. We'll do all that in just a second. You said this book is a book of observations. There is no nice tiny bow at the end. There isn't a
No, there's not.
conclusion.
And, I was quite careful to not tell anybody what to say or think or do. It's like, these are the things that I notice. I am laying them out for you. You can do with them what you want. But I happen to be optimistic. I do think that while the world does feel very scary, a lot of the issues outside of the climate seem to be getting worse. I think it's easy to forget in a time of short attention spans that things are getting better. We just now actually see all of the problems everywhere at the same time. Was even go back to 50 years ago, where there was all sorts of inequality that was generally ignored. 100 years ago was way worse. Take what I do, kids' books didn't really exist a century ago. Why? Because children didn't live predictably long enough to warrant getting their own books. We forget how far we have come.
So when you're a kid, because my eldest, who's 13, for the first time, and I know other kids have asked their parents this, asked me a couple of months ago now, and I found it quite disheartening when she asked it, because it said sometimes how kids think about the world, that they're full of joy and optimism and all these things, and then she came crashing in and said, why is the world so messed up? Why are we so terrible to each other?
Why the world is so messed up is because I think we're using the wrong measuring stick for success of what we want. It's all about growth, right? It's all in financial terms, it's all about growing and more and having more and faster. But to what end? If you look at uncharted growth in biological terms, that's also called cancer. So what do we want any of this stuff for? The story is accelerating beyond any reasonable person can keep up with it. Everything is disconnected. And I think we've lost a sense of our context and our purpose. And the hope then goes with that, because it feels absolutely insurmountable. But there is change afoot, and you can sense it everywhere you look. Think about when we were kids, the things that we valued were important, and now look at the kids in the room today and the things that they value and feel important. That's a comparison enough to realize that things are getting better. There's a mindset, there's a zeitgeist shift about returning to these things that we actually do want, which is safety, dignity, community, and purpose.
And the one thing that is true of all generations and the things, you've been able to cut through the noise of the TikTok and stuff, and that is through storytelling.
Because I forgot my password for TikTok. I got logged out.
We'll get you to do TikTok dance. I'm going to do a quick rapid fire with you.
Oh,
I said
okay,
I
okay.
was.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to do some quick rapid fire, and then we'll get to
All right.
audience questions. Okay, here we go. What are you currently reading?
Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer.
Okay,
Brilliant.
brilliant. Okay. Do you listen to music?
I do listen to music, yes. I kind of get lazy these days, where I let the algorithm do the picking. But I actually listen to a lot of classical music when I'm working, because I don't notice music unless it's bad when I'm working.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite thing to give you perspective and just calmness?
Remembering that I'm alive. So one of my favorite quotes of all time, Sophia Loren said, "Isn't it wonderful to be alive? You can forget all about it, and then suddenly you remember, here I am, I'm alive, I can walk around, I can talk, I can see things, remember things. Isn't that wonderful?"
What's the best bit of advice you've ever given to a kid?
Brush your teeth more.
Yes.
Believe me.
Okay. What's the best bit of advice either your children or a child outside of your own children has given you? Like, what sort of sticks with you?
Come play with me.
Oh, bless. That's lovely. And do you?
Yeah.
Yeah? Put everything down
Absolutely.
and go over.
It'll be gone before you know it.
What gives you hope?
People. I have yet to meet anybody who wants to be disliked. There are plenty of dislikable people, but I've never met anybody who wants to be disliked. And I think fundamentally all people at heart are good people. And we are often confronted with people whose story has been misinterpreted and they've doubled down in defense, defending that. That's to the point of mutation. But people are good people. And I believe in the potential of people. That's what gives me hope.
Last question before we go to the audience. This is his handwriting in this book as well as all his others. My kids read this and they say, look at his writing. It's all over the place. It's on straight lines. There's I'm trying to get my boys not to write with capitals when they're not supposed to, and then they pick up
I've
a
been
book and
called
go,
out
look,
for
this
that
guy's pretty
before.
good at what he does. And look what he have you always written this way?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely lean into a bit more for when it's in a book, but in my studio in Brooklyn, I could use with way more space, but space is a premium in Brooklyn, and I put everything where it needs to be, and then I write in the drawers exactly what it is, and it's, I've always liked how my handwriting looks. Actually, I had a dinner with a bunch of UN delegates there a couple of weeks ago, and somebody came up to me and he goes, congratulations. I was like, thank you, what for? And he goes, I checked, everything that it says on the drawers is actually in the drawers. So it's like short white pencils, for example, or rubber bands. But yeah, no, that is my writing, and it's always been subconscious, but I now can see that I was almost creating a language within a language by doing it. So when it does, the capitals are for emphasis, and then when I switch to cursive, you sort of speed up or trail off. It's like an added layer of inflection.
Like musicality
Yeah.
through it. Thank you. We so appreciate you. Thank you for coming
Thank
to
you.
Toronto.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the book.